Welcome back into the Prep Extra podcast. I'm Colton Stone alongside Chris Basnett. As always, we are through 4 full weeks of prep football.
Can you believe it?
No,
people?
I can't. I really can't. It seems like time flies when you're having fun, right?
Sure, yeah.
So 4 full weeks. We're going into week 5. You could say things are kind of. It seems like we're going to talk about this every week, where it seems like things are shaking out the way that we kind of thought they would, but at the same time, there are still some of those surprises that we're getting. I happen to be looking at records upcoming. Bellevue East has the same amount of wins as Bellevue West. Of course, the competition's been very different.
A little different.
But Class A, I think, is still proven now through 4 weeks to be the most wide open. I know we said it last week. We talked about what can Kearney do. Kearney goes out and gets a big win. They leapfrog in the ratings. And, Grand Island has an impressive showing against Lincoln High. West Side, they're down to Millard North at half. They dig deep. They find a way to win that game. But just looking at Class A, I think that's still, the most wide open, where it seems like week to week anybody is in danger of losing a game.
Yeah, Kearney's the great example, right? Unranked in the preseason. One starter back from last year. They're 4-0. They beat Bellevue West on the road. And I'm just super, and that's why they jumped to number 3. Just super impressed with how they started. 3 of their first 4 games on the road. All 3 of those games were on Thursday nights. So they were driving down, playing a game, driving back. 2 of them in Kearney, 1 of them in Bellevue. They win all 3 of them, and they've just gotten better and better every week. I'll pound the drum for Brendan Kuhl being one of the best coaches in the state, because he has been for the last 20 years at Kearney High. So great job by the Bearcats. But yeah, you look at Omaha West Side and you thought, man, they're going to be tough. They're going to be tough to beat. They're going to be tough to catch. And then, like you said, Millard North, who has some good young talent, has them down at halftime. And West Side wins that game by double digits, but still, they had to work for it. Gretna's the one team that's kind of really taken care of business so far, outside of the Creighton Prep game, and Creighton Prep's pretty good, despite the record. But yeah, you look at those 2 teams as maybe the favorites, and maybe just slightly, and after that, you can pick anybody out of a hat, I think, for 3 through 10. And Elkhorn South is unbeaten. They dropped to 4 through no fault of their own, just because Kearney's had a great start to the season. Bellevue West sitting there at number 5 is 3-2 with a 1-point loss, and a team again that led Omaha West Side at halftime before they lost that game. Omaha North's 3-1, played Bellevue West tough. Grand Island jumps into the ratings this week, 3-1 with a good win over Lincoln High. Norfolk only losses to Grand Island. There's a lot of moving pieces in that class, and it's maybe more interesting than I thought it was going to be. You kind of look at it in the preseason, you go, okay, West Side's got all these studs. They added some transfers. They're going to be really good. We know what Gretna has with Zane Flores. They're going to be really good. We know Creighton Prep's going to be really good. It's turned out there's a lot of pretty good teams, I think, in that class. And you mentioned anybody beating anybody. We had Lincoln Southwest ranked 6th this last week. Sorry for the jinx, Silverhawks. They lose to Papillion La Vista, who was winless, and lost by a couple touchdowns. So it just goes to show you, I think, the volatility in that class and kind of the unpredictability like you talked about week to week.
Yeah, our intention is, of course, never to jinx anybody, but so maybe we'll just tiptoe around it a little bit, right? So, but that is the thing about Class A. We say a lot of times that the power lies in the Metro. That's where the teams are. But again, Kearney and Grand Island kind of bringing in their own flavor of football to Class A. You were at the Grand Island Lincoln High game. A very interesting game, because those are 2 teams that really have good chances to go on some runs here late. It feels weird to say late. We're in midseason, but down the stretch of these last 5 weeks.
Yeah, I thought it was an important game for both teams as far as, kind of solidifying, your chances of getting into the playoffs. And not to say that a loss knocks Lincoln High out of the playoff race. Obviously it doesn't. There's a lot of football left. But I think it's 2 teams that if they make the playoffs, they can give teams trouble. Grand Island's really good on defense. They're not fancy. They're not flashy. It's kind of boring on offense. They're just going to run the ball at you. They'll throw it a little bit when they think they need to, and they'll play good defense. It's kind of old school football, but man, that defense is really good because Lincoln High's got athletes. We know that, and they've got a lot of them. And outside of one 31-yard catch by Benny Ngoyi, they didn't do a whole lot. That accounted for almost a fourth of their total offense in that game. And so Lincoln High is intriguing because they have those athletes that can match up with anybody. And if they're hot on the right night, in a one-game scenario in the playoffs, who knows what could happen, and same for Grand Island. If that defense is hot on the right night with the right matchup, who knows what could happen. So, yeah, it was an interesting game, I thought, between two interesting teams. Hadn't seen Grand Island play this year yet. They lost to West Side by 3 scores, but you know what? It's going to happen to a lot of teams this year. Bellevue West lost to West Side by 3 scores too. Lincoln High led Southwest in the fourth quarter, lost that game. They were tied in the fourth quarter in this one, lost that game. And I think that just goes back to the kind of lack of depth the Lynx have at some positions. The top-end guys are as good as anybody, but Grand Island wore them down with that physical run game, that physical defense, and that was really the difference at the end of the day. So, yeah, it was an interesting kind of contrast in styles, I think, between two teams that if they get the right matchup on the right day, they could shake things up in Class A.
Yeah, and essentially the fix to the Lynx is being able to finish in that fourth quarter, like you're saying. It's just they have the ability to get out in front. It's just a matter of getting it across the finish line.
That was the super impressive thing with Grand Island. That Lincoln High returns a fumble, 71 yards for a touchdown to go up 14-7 at home in the second quarter, and you're thinking, okay, they could do something here. They could ride that momentum. And Grand Island gets the ball back and just drives right down the field methodically, ties it before halftime, and you're at 0-0 again, So, yeah, it was super impressive what Grand Island did. And again, it wasn't fancy. I wasn't sitting there, blown away by athleticism or anything like that. But it's just they do what they have to do. And if you do that enough and you do that over and over, you're going to give yourself chances to win, and that's what happened.
Yeah, another recurring theme, I think, through 4 weeks, obviously number ones have still pretty much taken care of business. We mentioned last week Lincoln Pius having a chance to, maybe show that they can still hang around with the big dogs. And for a half of football, I mean, they were right there with Bennington. Yeah. They go into the half 7-0. Of course, finals 35-0. But that's the kind of team that Bennington is. They can take a rock fight and then just kind of run away with it in the second half.
Yeah.
But Pius was impressive for at least 24 minutes of football.
It was the same thing they did against Scotts Bluff, right? I believe that game was either tied at halftime or it was a one-score game at halftime, number 2 team in the state. Scotts Bluff pulled away in the second half. So it's tough to judge Pius when you just look at the final scores. You say, okay, well, they got outscored 61-6 in those 2 games. Well, that doesn't tell the whole story. They were with those 2 teams, 2 of the top teams in the state, if not the 2 top teams in the state, for a half of football. Now it's kind of the same thing as Lincoln High, right? Can they close it in the second half? Can they do something in the second half to give themselves a chance to win? So they're doing it for a half. You need to do it for 3/4 a full game, and then see what it looks like. But just that class to me is those top 5 teams and kind of everybody else, right? Like you kind of look at results and you look at final scores and you go, okay, well, yeah, Stewart's 3-1, lost to Lincoln Pius in a close game. Look at Omaha Scott, who's 2-2 and has been blown out twice. A traditional power in that class. Those top 5 teams, I think, have really taken care of business by and large. Waverly's only losses to Elkhorn in a close game. And so it's a class where the cream kind of rose to the top early, I think. And Pius is kind of hovering there, kind of in that middle. We have them ranked number 7 this week. What can they kind of do going forward now to kind of fix the offense, get it going a little more? They scored 9 points in a win over Hastings a couple weeks ago. They're shut out against Bennington. They score 6 against Scotts Bluff. And again, you're playing good teams when you're doing that. But can they find something offensively to kind of take that next step and give themselves an opportunity to kind of push into that top 5?
Yeah. Class B is interesting, but it's kind of interesting from, like you said, top 5 up. So not quite the same openness that we're seeing with Class A. It's wide open if you're only looking at it through a microscope, essentially. C1 Aurora takes care of business. Surprise, right?
Yeah. I think that class just kind of business as usual. 9 of the top 10 teams won. Aurora. It looks like Aurora, Pierce, right now with McCook, maybe kind of that next team with what they've done out west. But, yeah, I mean, and look, Aurora, they give up a scoring drive to Platteview in the first quarter, and they win 58-6.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, like that kind of tells you what they do. Pierce, that was a game, into the second half. It was a one-score game, I believe, late into the third quarter, maybe even into the fourth quarter before they score a couple touchdowns and kind of pull away. So challenged a little more, but again, it's a team that just has so much talent at that level. It's just tough to stay with them. I really hope we get to see that matchup in the playoffs when that gets here. Hopefully it's a state finals matchup. You never know how things go, of course, when the playoffs get here. But, man, I think that's going to be a game where it could just be – it's pretty clear those two teams are kind of a cut above everybody else right now. It'd be really fun to see them meet in the postseason.
Yeah. Class C2, what I would think is maybe one of the best games of the past week. We had Hastings St. Cecilia and Bishop Neumann, number 2 and number 7 as of last week. 44-34, so it's still, it's a 10-point win. Hastings St. Cecilia goes up, I believe it was 20-7 at halftime. They're up 26-7, and then here comes Bishop Neumann, 2 pick sixes, a block punt for a touchdown. All of a sudden now they're up, and then St. Cecilia kind of quietly just runs 3 touchdown drives and just kind of runs away with it at the end. But C2, they're still a clear number 1, but those teams right under there are right in the mix, and we've seen the past couple weeks that matchups are kind of showing what kind of depth the class has. Maybe we said this was one of the more wide open, but it just seems like we see number 1 and that's who we're going with. But St. Cecilia was really impressive to bounce back from having such a big lead and then having to fight back from a deficit.
Impressive by both teams. Like you said, Bishop Neumann falling way down early and then coming back. And like you said, St. Cecilia coming back and snatching the lead back and eventually winning that game. And what that tells me is it's 2 pretty good teams, probably. It's 2 teams with playmakers. And you got to have them. You got to have playmakers, whether it's Class A or whether it's Class C2. It doesn't matter. And I think those 2 teams have them. I think that's 2 teams that are going to make deep playoff runs. Again, can anybody challenge Norfolk Catholic? I don't know. I think it'd be pretty fun to see a Norfolk Catholic St. Cecilia game or Hardington Cedar Catholic, or even an Ord who lost us to Norfolk Catholic has come back and with 2 pretty impressive wins since then. So, yeah, it's another class where the number 1 team is pretty clear, but like you said, everything below that's kind of wide open. I think we saw that with St. Cecilia and Wahoo Newman the other night.
Yeah, it feels like it's early, but at the same time we're kind of learning what each team has to offer and kind of what to expect every week, and curbing those expectations slightly. That way, you don't blow something out of proportion. But it's there are plenty of teams in the mix there. Before we move on to next week's game, in your follow that came out Monday morning, you mentioned Elm Creek. Elm Creek was winless last year, correct?
0-8. Yep.
Yeah, and a very impressive start. Not ranked, but unbeaten, and a very impressive start to the 2022 season.
4-0 this year. They had a ton of injuries in 2021, had to play a lot of young kids, took its toll. They go 0-8. That's a program that had made 10 straight playoff appearances, had that snap last year. So kind of an uncharacteristic year for them. But yeah, 4-0 this year, and maybe the game of the year Friday night, or the finish of the year Friday night. Certainly they're down 48-46 to Central Valley. 2.8 seconds left, ball's around midfield. Throw it up, hope. Well, got answered. The Hail Mary gets answered. They catch it in the end zone. Touchdown, you win the game 52-48. Great celebration afterwards, as we saw in the video that made its way around Twitter. So, yeah, you have to give a shout-out to the Buffaloes for – and there's a lot of teams like that. I think of Ravenna won 1 game last year. They're 4-0. Ainsworth is 4-0 for the first time in maybe 30, 40 years, maybe ever. There's a lot of teams like that had rough years last year, but have kind of turned it around this year and turned it around in a big way. And that's kind of the cool part about high school football is you think you might have a pretty good team, even if you struggled the year before, and then you see it play out on the field like you have with Elm Creek this year. And they've had a special year so far. They get a fun one Friday night, and now you hope they can kind of keep that going and let that momentum build through the rest of the year.
All right, looking at week 5, of course, we're going to do our best to not jinx anybody, so don't hold us accountable. But, Bennington Elkhorn, probably the biggest game, Class B. Of course, this is another chance for Bennington to either prove that they're a cut above everybody in Class B, or it's a chance for Elkhorn to show like, hey, we're here too.
Yeah. Probably the best game in the state if you're just looking at rankings, number 4 versus number 1. I'm really interested to see if Elkhorn's ground game can keep Bennington's offense off the field. We know Bennington can play some defense. They shut out Pius last week, but that offense is the real deal. You know, they've scored 30 plus in every game. Their closest margin, I think, has been 33 points this year. They've been dominant. Elkhorn, of course, is a tradition-rich program that makes deep postseason runs and is a program that's used to this big stage. And not that Bennington isn't. They won a state title last year. They obviously know what they're doing. But, yeah, really interested to see what this looks like. Because if Bennington goes out and wins this thing by 3 scores, boy, it's tough not to just say, well, here you go. Here's the trophy.
Yeah.
You know, and of course you never do that. But it's pretty clear that they're the favorite. But if Elkhorn pushes them into the fourth quarter, wins that game, now maybe you provide a little glimmer of hope to the rest of that class. Maybe something could happen, an upset could happen. So, yeah, that's a very, very interesting game to me. And like I said, probably the best game in the state on paper on Friday night.
Looking around the city, what maybe jumps out to you? We've had, we're kind of getting into district play, and we've had some intra-city clashes recently. So what around the capital city is jumping out to you this week?
Well, there's a Thursday game that I like, Millard North at Southeast. We talked about Millard North, leading Westside at halftime last week with a lot of young talent. Southeast has kind of steadied things a little bit after that rough start. This is, I think, an important game for them. They're kind of taking that step back up in competition now. Can they kind of win that game, and kind of keep the momentum going? I think it's a big game for Southeast just from a confidence standpoint. Millard North's young, but they're good. And Southeast needs a win like that to kind of validate that, hey, we can make a run here over the second half of the season. So I really like that game on Thursday night. I really think that's going to be interesting. Lincoln High looks like they're going to get a get-right game against Northeast on Friday night. And outside of that, it's interesting. Lincoln East at Columbus, that's an interesting road trip, I think, for the Spartans. They played Northeast last week, won pretty easily. Can they go on the road now and do it? Parkview Christian and 6-man, we got to shout out 6-man like we always do.
That's right.
Number 4, they're playing number 6, Sterling, this week. That's a chance for them to pick up a ranked win. So it's a deal where, yeah, you get into district play and you maybe aren't going to have number 1 versus number 2 every week or number 1 versus number 3 every week, but it's a deal where these are important games. And it's for teams in the capital city. Southwest needs to rebound on Friday night. They host Omaha Bryan up at Lincoln Northwest. It feels weird to say Southwest is going to host a game at Northwest, but that's what they're doing. That's a game where Southwest needs to bounce back and win that game and kind of right the ship. So you don't look at these matchups and say, man, that game blows me out of the water. But it's still a lot of important games for the city teams to either A, kind of continue to build on what they've done so far, or A, kind of reestablish themselves and kind of get things right as you head into district play now.
Yeah, sometimes, again, we're mid-season, but also kind of getting into that late stretch where every game's important in the sense of, it might not be a shiny matchup that you say, wow, we're going to get up for this game, but you have to get up for every game down the stretch if you want to make a run towards the playoffs. And we've seen, again, that especially in Class A, anything can happen, and any given week, if you're not out and prepared for who you're playing, you might not come away with the win that you were hoping to come away with. So it'll be interesting to see how, teams kind of still try to either find those pieces or, continue the success that they're having.
We get up for every podcast here.
That's right.
We never have a losing week. So we want to thank you guys for tuning in. We'll have more for you next week. Always an adventure in Nebraska prep football, so stay with us. Thanks.